Buckingham Palace has said King Charles spent a short period of time in hospital today after experiencing the temporary side effects of his cancer treatment.
Buckingham Palace confirmed that King Charles spent a brief time in hospital today after reacting to the ongoing cancer treatments he's been receiving. It was described as temporary, but it was enough to send a ripple of anxiety across the country. Inside the palace, officials are worried. Outside the palace, the public is bracing for updates. And then came the moment people had been dreading. Prince William stepped forward and spoke with a tone that revealed far more than the words themselves. His message carried a sadness that couldn't be hidden, but also a quiet resolve. He admitted that life can flip in an instant, even for a family that seems untouchable. You always assume, this won't be us, until one day it is. And when that day comes, it shakes you to your core. Millions were left wondering what exactly William was preparing the world for. What did he reveal about his father's health? And what could it mean for the future of the monarchy? He insisted that real answers exist, that real solutions do too, but his expression hinted at the emotional weight behind those words. Today, we're diving into the painful truth behind William's confirmation and what it means for King Charles as he confronts perhaps the greatest challenge of his life. A life built on duty, tested by unexpected storms. From the very beginning, King Charles III walked a path unlike any other. Born November 14, 1948, the first child of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, he entered a world where history, responsibility, and tradition shaped every moment. His early years unfolded behind palace gates and under the watchful eye of a nation. Even as a child, he was described as thoughtful and observant, the kind of boy who would rather watch quietly than compete for attention. With Princess Anne close by his side, and later Princes Andrew and Edward, he learned early what it meant to carry both privilege and pressure. His upbringing blended strict royal tradition with the modern expectations of a changing world. He attended Cheam and then the famously demanding Gordonstoun in Scotland, where the harsh environment tested him daily. It was tough, often too tough, but it taught him endurance, something he would rely on for the rest of his life. At Cambridge, he studied subjects that fed his curiosity about people, the planet, and the delicate balance between the two. He pushed himself further by learning to fly and serving in both the Royal Air Force and the Royal Navy, continuing the long-standing royal commitment to military service. Those who knew him as a young man often described him as steady, thoughtful, and deeply committed, never flashy but always present. Over time, his passion for architecture, conservation, and the natural world became central to who he was. In the 1970s and 80s, he spoke urgently about environmental protection, sustainable farming, and the dangers of neglecting the planet, long before those topics became global priorities. Some dismissed him, others rolled their eyes. Yet decades later, many now recognize that he was warning us far ahead of his time. Throughout these years, Charles remained active and grounded. He found peace in long walks, gardens, and the outdoors at his cherished Highgrove estate. His life was disciplined, meaningful, and full of purpose, a foundation that now faces its hardest test as his health becomes a growing concern. For most of his adult life, King Charles rarely faced any medical issues worth public attention. Aside from a hernia repaired back in 2003 and a few bumps and bruises picked up from outdoor hobbies, nothing ever triggered national worry. People who traveled with him often joked that he had more stamina than half the staff. He could spend hours greeting crowds, deliver speech after speech, and still squeeze in visits with farmers, small shop owners, and local artists long after everyone else was ready to call it a day. But everything shifted in September 2022. When Queen Elizabeth II passed away, Charles stepped into the role he had waited for longer than any heir in British history. Overnight, he became King Charles III. To many, he represented both tradition and change, the dutiful son honoring his mother's enormous legacy, and the forward-thinking monarch hoping to reshape how the crown connects with a new generation. His early days on the throne carried a mix of grief, responsibility, and a quiet resolve. He sounded like a man determined to protect the past while guiding the institution into something more modern. In those first months, there was no hint of the health battle that would later shake the world. He appeared steady and surprisingly energetic for his age, moving from one engagement to the next as if the weight of the crown only pushed him to work harder. Palace aides often spoke about his strict routines, Early mornings, full schedules, late nights poring over briefing papers. For a while, it seemed like the monarchy was preparing for a long, stable chapter under his leadership. But life has a way of turning unexpectedly. Even for a king. What came next was supposed to be simple, barely more than a footnote on the palace's official calendar. In January 2024, the public was informed that the king would undergo treatment for an enlarged prostate, a very common, mostly harmless condition in older men. The announcement was there, the tone was light, and officials emphasized there was nothing sinister behind it. They even mentioned he was upbeat, which reassured the public. For a brief moment, it seemed like everything was fine. But something happened that wasn't shared with the world. Not at first. During that same medical visit, doctors noticed something else. The palace described it carefully as a separate issue of concern. A phrase so vague it immediately raised red flags among those who follow royal announcements closely. It didn't take long before speculation started swirling. The public could feel that something wasn't being said. Then came February 5, 2024, a date now etched into royal history. That morning, Buckingham Palace released a short, stark update. The king, it said, had been diagnosed with a form of cancer and would begin regular treatments. They made it clear it wasn't prostate cancer, but offered no further details. That silence, that lack of clarity, created a shockwave. News outlets around the globe cut into programming. Social media froze. Headlines appeared within seconds. Those 3 words, a form of cancer, stopped the usual royal gossip machine instantly. And so began months of quiet tension, public worry, and private uncertainty. It was in the middle of that emotional storm that Prince William would eventually step forward, confirming what many had been fearing but didn't want to say out loud. But before that moment came, it all began, strangely enough, with a morning in London that felt completely ordinary. The kind of cool, gray morning the city wears like a signature. Morning settled over London in that quiet, familiar way the city knows so well. A thin mist curled through the streets, softening the edges of the palace gates, while the sky carried its usual dim wash of silver. People hurried to work, buses hissed along the road, and the world moved with the steady rhythm of another ordinary day. Even inside Buckingham Palace, everything looked routine. Footmen walked the corridors with practiced calm, secretaries flipped through files, and the guards outside held their poised stillness in bright scarlet, unbothered by the chill in the air. Nothing, absolutely nothing, hinted at what was coming. And then, at precisely 9:47 a.m., the air shifted. It didn't start with screams or alarms. It began as something almost too soft to notice, a breath of sound, a fragment of conversation that didn't belong. A butler froze halfway down a staircase. A housemaid stopped so abruptly her tray slipped from her fingers, crashing against the floor. An aide lowered his papers and stared into nothing as the words sank in. The king has fallen ill. For simple words, but they moved through the halls like an icy wind, robbing the palace of its usual composure. The calm machinery of royal life shuddered. Men who normally walked with slow ceremonial purpose suddenly rushed down polished corridors. Radios crackled. Boots thundered across stone. The massive gates that usually opened with quiet dignity slammed shut with a metallic finality. In seconds, the palace transformed. Cars in deep black shot through the courtyard. Doors opened and closed like panicked breaths. Someone was crying. Someone else was shouting orders. Phones rang so constantly it sounded like an alarm bell. Fear settled over the building like a heavy fog. Thick, suffocating, impossible to ignore. By noon, the world finally learned what was happening behind those walls. A statement, brief enough to fit on a single line, landed in the hands of reporters. It carried no warmth, no comfort, just a stark message from the palace. His Majesty is under medical supervision due to complications from treatment. That was it. No elaboration. No glimpse of the king. No assurances. Nothing but a cold sentence and then a silence that stretched across Britain like a long shadow. That silence was louder than any speech. Television anchors stumbled through breaking reports. Crowds grew outside the gates, their faces drawn with worry. People in cafes, on buses, in quiet suburbs all asked the same fearful question. What's really happening to the king? Inside, The truth hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. Staff moved with hushed urgency, speaking in whispers that bounced off the high ceilings. They didn't need a public announcement to know the gravity of the moment. This wasn't an ordinary setback or a temporary complication. This was serious. Far more serious than anyone on the outside had been allowed to imagine. The monarch who had waited a lifetime to wear the crown now lay fighting for the strength to keep it. As day faded into evening, the skies themselves seemed to mourn. Heavy gray clouds pressed down over London, and a damp chill settled in. The great rooms of the palace, once filled with music, laughter, and ceremony, felt hollow. Every footstep echoed. Every quiet conversation ended in a sigh. Somewhere someone was praying. Outside, more people gathered. Candles dotted the ground like tiny stars, glowing softly in the dusk. Visitors left flowers. Some wiped tears. Others stood in silence, watching the palace as though their gaze could somehow hold the king steady. History had seen the monarchy weather wars, political storms, and national heartbreak. But this was different. This was intimate, personal, raw. The struggle was not about a throne or a legacy. It was about a man, one who carried centuries of duty on his shoulders, suddenly fragile in a way no crown could protect. That morning had begun with order and tradition. By nightfall, it trembled with fear and uncertainty. The future of the Rain people had waited so long to witness suddenly felt fragile, hanging like a lantern in the wind. And as the clock crept toward midnight, one truth settled across the palace like frost. Everything now depended on one man's survival, and that man was slipping. So how did Prince William find the strength to speak when the world needed answers? What burdens had Charles been carrying long before illness struck? What quiet fights did he face away from cameras and ceremonies? We uncover all of it now. When Prince William finally stepped before the cameras, the weight of the moment sat plainly on his shoulders. His voice didn't waver, but anyone watching could feel the pain behind every syllable. The words he delivered were heavy, heartbreaking, and unforgettable. "My father's condition is stable," he said slowly, "but his illness is incurable. We're holding close to the time we have together." And with that, the world understood. The crown itself had entered its most delicate moment in generations. The hush that fell over the palace grounds felt heavier than any storm. It wasn't just a rumor confirmed, it was a truth too painful to ignore. Outside Buckingham Palace, sorrow hung in the cold November air. Thousands had gathered, shoulder to shoulder, holding flowers, candles, and phones, replaying the moment again and again. Some whispered prayers. Others simply stared at the palace windows, hoping for any sign, a shadow, a movement, anything. Reporters lined the mall like silent sentinels. Cameras trained on the balcony that had once welcomed so many royal waves. Now, velvet curtains hid the view from the world. Across the globe, newsrooms shifted from speculation to mourning. Words like incurable and cherished reverberated across continents, shaping how millions now saw their monarch. For months, there had been quiet whispers. King Charles had been diagnosed with cancer in early 2024, yet he continued his duties with unwavering commitment. Greeting dignitaries, attending meetings, keeping a calm public front. Those closest to him noticed the subtle changes. Slower movements, longer pauses, the fatigue no smile could fully mask. This wasn't the first time Charles had endured pain with grace. In his younger years, he embodied strength and persistence, rising before dawn, riding through the misty Scottish countryside, finding solace in the rhythm of horse and earth. His devotion to polo and the land wasn't mere leisure. It was proof of discipline, of endurance. Health was a responsibility, resilience a duty. But time, relentless and impartial, tested that resolve. Surgeries came, knees in 1998, a hernia in 2003, smaller procedures in later years. Each time, Charles emerged with a handshake, a smile, a wave, never showing surrender. Yet those closest sensed a subtle shift, a new awareness of fragility, of legacy, of the limits of human strength. Now, as Prince William addressed the world, that legacy seemed to stand behind him. Proud, weathered, yet unbroken. A king who had once played through pain now inspired a son who spoke through heartbreak. The monarchy has always been about endurance, about keeping one's head high despite the storm. But even endurance carries a cost. Under the grey November sky, Britain waited in quiet tension, suspended between gratitude and grief, wondering how long the silence would last. When it finally breaks, will it mark the end of a reign, or the start of a deeper reckoning within the crown? The truth is, King Charles has faced one of the most difficult chapters of his life in recent years. What should have been a time of celebration after his long-awaited coronation turned into months of uncertainty, worry, and resilience, for both him and the royal family. Less than a year into his reign, news of a cancer diagnosis surfaced, catching the public off guard while he was being treated for an unrelated health concern. What began as a routine checkup for a prostate issue, something many associate with aging, revealed something far more serious. King Charles's health journey quickly became a powerful reminder that true strength isn't the absence of hardship. It's the ability to face struggle with dignity and perseverance. With the king seriously ill, the world watched closely. How would the royal family respond? Would tensions rise behind palace walls? The answer was far more human than headlines suggested. Beneath the crowns and ceremonies, the family's vulnerability shone through, proving that even monarchs are tested by life's challenges. Charles's battle with illness, marked by determination and quiet resilience, became a symbol of courage. As he focused on recovery, so too did his loved ones, withdrawing from public life to support each other. For Prince William, juggling royal duties while caring for both his father and his wife proved overwhelming. 2024 was the hardest year of my life, he admitted, offering a rare glimpse of the emotional toll illness takes, even on those born into privilege. Meanwhile, King Charles embarked on an ongoing course of treatment. The details were kept private, in keeping with royal tradition, but it was clear his journey was arduous. For over a year, he quietly endured therapy and medical supervision, cutting back on his public appearances. At the same time, Princess Kate shared the hopeful news of her remission, lifting the spirits of millions who had followed her struggle with empathy and admiration. Her courage mirrored Charles's own, proving that even amid royal splendor, the human stories of pain, endurance, and hope remain ever present. The twin revelations shook not only the royal household but the nation itself. Just as the king assumed the weight of the crown after Queen Elizabeth II's passing, his diagnosis, alongside Kate's, sent waves of concern across the UK and beyond. The public, who had celebrated the coronation with grandeur, now found themselves praying for their monarch's recovery. Despite the setbacks, King Charles has steadily returned to his duties. His presence at official events is gradually increasing, a testament to his discipline, determination, and reflective nature, qualities that have defined him for decades. The early months of his reign also brought major changes behind the scenes. A sweeping review of royal patronages, presidencies, and charitable links was quietly undertaken. The goal, to align the monarchy with modern priorities and ensure the workload remained realistic for the working royals. For decades, tradition had dictated the continuation of certain roles, but now every connection was examined. When the results were revealed, the public and organizations alike were surprised. Many charities, long accustomed to royal patronage, had grown to depend on it as part of their identity. The palace explained that not every connection could continue and that some roles needed to be passed on. It was practical, yes, but also one of the first clear signs that King Charles's reign would be its own, shaped by today's needs rather than inherited custom. Detailed lists and press notes outlined the decisions. Which groups would retain a royal link, which would receive new patronage, and which would see ties end. The shift sent a strong message. The monarchy was evolving, quietly but deliberately, even amid personal and national challenges. Stepping down as Colonel of the Scots Guards was more than a ceremonial gesture. It was a sign of the times. After decades of parades, inspections, and regimental duties, age was catching up. This move reflected a wider trend, older members of the royal family gradually reducing their responsibilities, leaving more space for a smaller circle of working royals to take the lead. Meanwhile, Buckingham Palace itself became a focal point. Years of renovation work, the most extensive in its history, had finally drawn public attention. With costs running into the hundreds of millions and funded through an increase in the sovereign grant, the palace warned the work was unavoidable. Delays could risk serious structural failures. Because of the renovations, parts of the palace could no longer host state visits or large receptions, which had to be moved to alternative venues like Windsor Castle and St. James's Palace. It was practical, but also marked a break from decades of tradition. At the same time, the royal family's ongoing review of roles and patronages began to show its impact. The Queen's list of charitable responsibilities expanded, reflecting both her trust and proven contributions. It wasn't just about filling empty spots. She was taking on work she had long supported. Charities expressed gratitude. Shelterbox confirmed she would remain their patron, and the Queen's Nursing Institute acknowledged the importance of her ongoing support. This revealed an important point. The review wasn't only about losses, but also gains. Across generations, change was taking hold. The Duke of Kent, one of the longest-serving royals and a cousin of the late Queen, began handing over his military roles. Similar retirements and handovers among senior royals followed, creating a pattern of older members stepping back to strengthen the system for the future. But behind palace walls, these decisions were not without tension. Some felt relief, others disappointment, and a few, like Queen Camilla, were reportedly pushed to the edge by the rapid pace of change. For charities, the outcome was transformative. Organizations that retained royal links felt reassurance, while those losing them faced a sudden void. Some had enjoyed royal patronage for over a century. At the same time, Queen Camilla's profile rose. She took on about 15 new patronages, focusing on areas she had long championed, from nursing and literacy to volunteer support. Her expansion reflected steady progress and deepened commitment. As Duchess of Cornwall, she had built her reputation around promoting reading and supporting victims of domestic abuse. Now, her influence reached further. The renovation and the changes in royal roles also brought public debate. With such enormous costs, questions arose. Should taxpayers fund the palace's modernization? Supporters argued it was essential maintenance for a national landmark, preventing far greater expenses later. The palace emphasized the technical necessity of the work, and trustees of the sovereign grant underscored the oversight measures in place. Official financial reports provided transparency, but the discussions highlighted how much these updates affected both the family and the nation. In short, this period marked a shift, a modernization of duties, a reshaping of royal traditions, and a balancing act between personal resilience, public expectation, and the practical demands of one of the world's oldest institutions. Recent reports from the royal household revealed rising costs in areas like energy and staff salaries. These figures helped explain why some cuts and changes were necessary. They also tied into a bigger message: a modern monarchy that keeps a closer eye on spending while adapting to the needs of today. The scale of the review became strikingly clear when nearly 200 organizations were reported as affected. This wasn't a minor adjustment, it was a sweeping reshuffle, touching charities, patronages, and long-standing royal commitments. The ripple effects were felt across the UK and beyond. As we reflect on King Charles's health journey, it raises a bigger question. What does this chapter tell us about the monarchy today? Has it brought the family closer to the public, showing their vulnerability and humanity? Or has it reminded us of the weight and isolation that comes with the crown? We want to hear what you think. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective matters. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more updates. And while you're here, click the video on your screen next. You won't want to miss it. If you want, I can now combine clips 4 to 7 into a single.